ready for another deep dive?
You bet.
Awesome. So today we're taking a deep dive into something we all know at least a little about: water.
Right. It's essential.
Exactly. It's one of those things we kind of take for granted, but when you really start digging into it, well, it's pretty mind-blowing.
You said it.
So we've got a bunch of sources for this deep dive, everything from like the hardcore science of water to practical tips on how to conserve it, and even, get this, some historical and personal perspectives on water.
It's a really interesting mix.
It is. And the mission for this deep dive, I'm thinking it's less about just learning the facts about water and more about figuring out why it matters so much, like right now.
For sure. And what we can actually do about it, like in our own lives.
Exactly. So first things first,
Right.
our expert, take it away. What makes water so essential for life? I mean, we all know we need it to survive, but the sources are hinting at something way deeper than that.
Yeah, it's more than just drink 8 glasses a day. Water has these unique properties that are basically holding our planet and our bodies together.
Okay, now that's what I call a hook. So we're talking more than just staying hydrated here. What exactly makes water so special beyond just keeping us alive?
It's wild how something so simple can be so complex. Like, take water being the universal solvent.
Oh, yeah, I remember that from like high school chemistry, I think.
It's not just a fancy term. This ability to dissolve tons of different substances means our bodies can transport nutrients, get rid of waste, and even regulate our temperature.
Hold on, so when I'm sweating after a run, that's water's solvent power in action.
You got it. And zoom out to the bigger picture, it's how ecosystems work, how nutrients cycle through the environment. Without it, well, things would be pretty stagnant. Literally.
Okay, now that's way more interesting than how they explained it back in school.
Yeah.
What about this high heat capacity thing I keep seeing in the sources? That sounds pretty sciencey.
Right, but think of it this way. It's like the Earth has this giant thermal battery, and guess what? It's mostly water.
Okay, I'm listening.
So it takes loads of energy to change water's temperature, and that's why your body can stay at a pretty steady temperature, even when it's sweltering hot or freezing outside.
I see.
And on a planetary level, our oceans are like these massive heat sinks, right? They prevent wild temperature swings that would make life impossible.
So water's not just keeping me comfortable, it's keeping the planet livable.
Mm.
Makes sense why that whole under threat thing is a big deal now. Our source also mentioned something about water being densest at 4 degrees Celsius. Now, unless I'm planning on becoming an ice swimmer, why should I care?
It's a perfect example of how, even a tiny detail about water can have huge effects. That densest point means that in lakes and oceans, the coldest water sinks to the bottom.
Makes sense.
Right, which creates a sort of natural conveyor belt that circulates oxygen and nutrients, supporting all the life down there. Mess with that, and, well, the consequences could be pretty serious.
Okay, you've officially blown my mind about water. So we've talked molecules, but let's get to, well, planet Earth. You know, that whole water cycle we all learned about. Evaporation, condensation, precipitation. Easy peasy, right?
Yeah, we learned that way back when, before climate change was such a big deal.
Exactly.
What's scary now is that this simple system is being disrupted, and the consequences are affecting everyone, not just places that are super dry.
I see what you're saying. The sources talk about less predictable rainfall, which sounds pretty chaotic. So we're talking droughts in some places and then mega floods in others. That's not exactly a good combo.
It's like a recipe for disaster, really.
How so?
Well, unpredictable rainfall messes with agriculture, damages infrastructure, displaces people,
Wow.
and it's happening everywhere, not just in typically dry places. Even areas that normally get plenty of rain are seeing sudden droughts, and others are getting slammed with floods.
Yikes.
And the thing is, these impacts are all connected.
That's a lot more complex than the water cycle diagram I remember. Speaking of changing things, what about glacier melt? I know it causes rising sea levels, but is there more to it?
Yeah. There's this other consequence that people don't always think about. It's the possibility that our freshwater sources could get saltier. As glaciers melt.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
They pour a ton of fresh water into the oceans, and that can mess with the balance of freshwater ecosystems. The salinization thing can impact drinking water, agriculture, and entire ecosystems. It's a domino effect.
So, to recap, we've got water. It's essential for life. The way it cycles around is changing. And these changes are impacting all of us. I'm sensing a theme here, and it's not exactly a happy one.
It's a wake-up call, for sure. It makes us think about water, not just something we need, but as a system that's connected to some of the biggest challenges we're facing.
That's a good point. Okay, next up, let's talk about how water is actually distributed around the planet. Our sources paint a pretty stark picture, like tons of water in some places and barely any in others. It's a pretty crazy contrast.
You see that a lot. Like, you've got the Amazon basin, right? It's overflowing with fresh water. And then you have places like parts of North Africa where finding enough water is a daily struggle.
Yeah, the difference is massive.
It is.
And it's not just about location, is it? How much water we use and, like, who's using it also matters.
Totally. You might hear numbers about the average water use per person, but that doesn't tell the whole story. The difference between rich and poor countries is huge.
That makes sense.
And then you've got how water is used by different industries.
Yeah.
You might be surprised to find out who the biggest users are.
Oh, I was actually really surprised. Like mining and the textile industry and even some types of food production use a ton of water. Most of us probably don't even think about it.
Right. It makes you think. Even if you live somewhere with plenty of water, you've got to think about how your choices are connected to these global water use patterns. Like what you buy, consume, that all plays a role.
It's easy to feel removed from the issue when clean water comes out of your tap.
Yeah.
But really, we're all connected to this big global water system.
We are.
And that connection becomes even more important when we're talking about water scarcity. It's more than just running out of water, isn't it?
Right. Pollution and lack of access are just as important as physical scarcity, maybe even more so.
Yeah, the sources made that really clear.
Mm-hmm.
And they go into all the different things that pollute water. It's not just big factories. We're talking fertilizers and like runoff from paved surfaces. Even just everyday activities can pollute water.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. And it reminds me that we often forget about the human cost of all this. Like millions of people don't have access to safe drinking water. And it's often women and girls who are hit the hardest.
You're right. They're the ones walking miles to collect water and missing out on school and other opportunities. Water issues are, like, totally tied up with social justice.
So even if we have clean water at home, understanding these challenges can help us make better choices, right?
Mhm.
Whether that's giving to charities or changing our buying habits or fighting for better policies, we all have a role to play.
Exactly. It's about realizing that our choices affect people all over the world. We're not isolated from these issues, even if it feels that way.
Now, this part was kind of funny. When I got to the worst human habits section, I got to admit, I chuckled. The sources, like, calling us out on all the stupid little things we do that waste water.
I know, right? Like leaving the tap running or taking super long showers.
Yeah, like, who hasn't done that?
But what I find interesting is how it goes beyond those habits and looks at, like, the mindsets behind them.
Yeah, it talks about that lack of awareness. Like, what difference does it really make if I leave the water running for a couple minutes? We've all been there.
We have. But the source challenges us to think about it. Even if we're already trying to be good about water, is there room for improvement? Can we get other people to care? Those are the questions.
Those are good questions. Okay, so far we've covered how important water is and how climate change is messing things up. And then there's the whole scarcity and pollution problem.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's a bit overwhelming. So let's shift gears and talk about what we can do about it.
And the good news is it's not all doom and gloom. There are solutions, and they don't have to be huge or rely on fancy technology. There's stuff we can do at home with our neighbors and just in our everyday lives.
Give me an example.
Like at home, the source mentions simple things like fixing leaks and putting in those water-saving gadgets. Oh, and being mindful of how long your showers are.
Okay, not rocket science.
Right, small stuff, but it adds up, especially if you get other people to do it too.
Right. What about bigger solutions?
Well, there are things like more efficient farming techniques, audits for industries to cut down on water waste, and policies that prioritize water conservation.
So many different levels. I liked how the source emphasizes that even those little things at home matter, especially if we can get others to do the same. It's that whole ripple effect thing, right?
Exactly. Those individual actions might seem tiny, but when you multiply them across communities, it can make a big difference.
That makes me feel a little better.
Yeah.
Now, there was this section on DIY water filtration that I was super curious about. The source even has instructions on how to make a filter at home.
What's interesting about that part is that it's not saying, like, this is the answer, you know? It's more about empowering people. The source even admits that those homemade filters have limits. They're not a perfect solution, and they might not even be safe in some cases.
But in an emergency or in places where clean water is really hard to get, it could be a lifesaver.
Totally. And it goes back to this idea of community action that keeps coming up in the sources. Like, the source ends with this powerful thought about connecting with your neighbors and sharing knowledge.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we're not in this alone. Water connects us all, right?
Oh.
It's a shared resource, so we have to face these challenges together.
We do. We do. And that's a good thing, right? Working together is key if we want to solve these problems.
Absolutely. So let's talk solutions. Where do we even start?
Well, it's not just about like finding more water, it's about using what we've already got way smarter. Our sources mention this thing called integrated water resource management, which sounds kind of jargony, but is that basically what they're talking about?
That's a mouthful for sure. But yeah, break it down for us. What does that even mean?
Well, it means moving away from that old way of thinking, where everybody who uses water, like farmers, industries, cities, they were all in their own little bubbles. This integrated water resource management thing, it's about understanding that everybody and everything is connected.
I see, so it's a more holistic approach.
Right. We got to look at the whole picture from the mountains to the oceans and figure out how to use water in a way that works for everyone, even, like the plants and animals that depend on it.
So less about building more dams and more about working together to use water more efficiently.
Bingo. It's about understanding that water is a shared resource. Like, we've got to manage it together, figure out how to meet everyone's needs without messing up our water systems.
Makes sense. Now, our sources also talk about some cool tech stuff like desalination, wastewater treatment, even cloud seeding. It's like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Technology definitely has a role to play, and these new ideas offer some pretty exciting possibilities, especially for places dealing with serious water scarcity. But we can't just jump into tech without thinking about the downsides.
Hmm.
The cost, the energy it takes, and like what might happen if we get it wrong.
Right. Sometimes the simple solutions are the best, and I was totally fascinated by the section on rainwater harvesting. Like, it seems so obvious. Why aren't more people doing this already?
Right. It's such a simple idea, and it can be used at home or even scaled up for a whole community. It's about like tapping into a resource that's literally falling from the sky instead of always relying on those big city water systems.
Love it. So simple and so smart, especially if we're trying to be more careful with our water use.
It's a great way to rely less on traditional water sources and be more self-sufficient. Plus, you get to like connect with the natural water cycle. It's hands-on.
I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah.
Our sources also talk about the need for, well, more education. Sounds kind of basic, but I guess if people don't understand how important water is, why would they bother conserving it?
It's the foundation, really. When people are educated, they can make better choices about how they use water, like knowing where their water comes from, how much they're using, and how their choices affect others and the environment.
So we're talking about more than just like turning on the tap and expecting water to magically appear. We need to understand the whole system.
We do. And it's not just about what individuals do. We need policies and regulations that make sure everyone is using water responsibly.
Right, like rules that encourage water efficiency and protect our water sources from getting polluted. It's about making sure everyone understands that water is precious.
You got it. We need to manage it wisely.
This makes me realize water doesn't really care about borders and stuff, right? It flows wherever it wants. So all these solutions we've been talking about, they have to work on a global level too.
You're absolutely right. When a river flows through multiple countries, those countries have to work together to manage it. It's about cooperation, not conflict, if we want everyone to have access to clean water.
Water is the ultimate connector, isn't it? Essential for life, shapes our world, drives our economies, and it makes us realize that we all need to work together, even across borders.
Powerful stuff, right?
It is. And that interconnectedness is both like a challenge and a huge opportunity. We're all part of this global water community, sharing this limited resource. That's the first step to figuring out solutions that work for everybody.
I think so too.
Okay, so we've talked about solutions for individuals, communities, even on a global level. But where does the listener fit into all of this? I mean, it's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed. Like, what can I actually do that will make a difference?
It's a good question, and it's something the sources talk about a lot, the messages. Even small actions can make a difference. It could be as simple as fixing a leaky faucet or getting a new water-saving washing machine, or even just paying attention to how much water you use every day.
It's encouraging to hear that we can all be part of the solution, starting right here, right now, in our own homes.
Absolutely. It's a shift in how we think about water. From taking it for granted to seeing it as something precious, a gift that we need to take care of for everyone. We need to think about how we use it and make choices that protect it for future generations.
So instead of just focusing on saving water, it's more about like understanding our role in the story of water and acting accordingly.
You got it. And it's about understanding that how we treat water, it's connected to our own future. And
Right.
when you think about it like that, well, it means we all have a part to play. We all have a story to tell, and we can all make a difference.
We've explored a lot in this deep dive. The science of water, the challenges we're facing globally, the practical things we can do, and even how we think about water on a deeper level. I mean, it's clear that water is so much more than just something we drink.
It really is. It's essential for life. It shapes our world, and it's something we need to talk about, think about, and take action on.
I think one of the coolest things we've learned is that water is a powerful connector. It brings us together in so many ways.
You're right. It's a source of life. It shapes our landscapes. It drives economies. And ultimately, it reflects our own values and choices.
When we start respecting water, we're not just protecting a resource, we're nurturing a connection to something way bigger than ourselves. It's like we're becoming part of something bigger.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Thanks for diving in with us on this one. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep. You never know what you might discover. We've moved from water is life to water is a story, which is a pretty cool way to think about it.
Yeah.
But what does it actually look like to, live that story, to be a good water steward like our sources talk about?
Yeah, it's a journey for sure, not just a one-time thing. And it starts with understanding that our relationship with water is about way more than just turning on the tap. It's about understanding that, like, every drop of water has a history and a journey, and we're shaping its future with the choices we make.
It makes me think back to those personal stories in the sources, like all those little ways we probably waste water every day without even thinking about it.
It's easy to ignore those things, but they do make you stop and think. And our sources don't just want us to feel bad, they want us to actually do something about it.
So it's not enough to just be aware of the problem. We have to change how we act. But how do we move from those individual actions to something bigger, something that really makes a difference?
The sources keep coming back to this idea of community that's super important. Like, share what you know with your neighbors, work together to save water in your area, support groups that are working on water issues around the world. Those are the things that can really make a difference.
It's like that saying, think globally, act locally, but for water.
Exactly. And when people come together, amazing things can happen. We don't have to wait for governments or big companies to fix everything. We can make a difference right now.
This deep dive has really taken us from the tiny details to the big picture. It's been fascinating, but also a little scary. If someone is listening to this and they're feeling inspired, but maybe also a little overwhelmed, what's the one thing we want them to remember?
I'd say remember this. Water connects us all. It's essential for life. It drives our economies. It shapes the world around us. And in the end, it shows us what we value and the choices we make. When we learn to appreciate and respect water, we're not just protecting something we need, we're connecting with something much bigger than ourselves.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So it's not just about saving water. It's about understanding our place in the water story and acting in a way that honors that.
That's it. It's about recognizing that our future is tied to the future of water. And that means we all have something to contribute, we all have a story to tell, and we can all make a difference.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time. And until then, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep. You never know what you'll discover.